When this film came out in 1985, there was one little moment in it that was not only considered impossible, but it went against everything people thought they knew about cinema.
That was incredibly forward-thinking, and we were too young and stupid to know it was impossible, so we just kind of did it.
It is only about 40 seconds long, so pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But after doing some research and talking to someone who was actually involved in the making of it, I couldn't help but think that this tiny little moment ended up changing the entire film industry in more ways than anyone could have predicted.
I mean, the things it did blew people's minds.
Was this considered a crazy, bold idea? Or was there a confidence that this could definitely be pulled off?
Yes. Both.
Let's go on to our location report on the making of another film from the prolific Steven Spielberg organization, Young Sherlock Holmes and the Pyramid of Fear.
Alright, so the film is Young Sherlock Holmes. It was produced by Steven Spielberg, who was the absolute box office king at the time, and it is also important to mention that it was written by Chris Columbus, who was on a hot streak with Gremlins and The Goonies, and it was directed by Barry Levinson, who was there to bring an emotional realism to an otherwise fantastical story. Speaking of which, the script is as ambitious as it gets. We have a dark conspiracy, secret society, ancient codes, big set pieces, and all the ingredients for a classic family adventure. So out of the many interesting elements in the script, one in particular would prove to be quite tricky. A mysterious person who is able to make people hallucinate or essentially experience a nightmare while awake. The reason for that is because while a lot of those hallucinations could easily be achieved with practical effects, that one in particular, a knight made out of stained glass in a church magically coming to life, was going to be a whole another story. Basically, none of the conventional techniques would work. If they tried, for example, a 2D animation, it would look flat and cartoonish, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and this was supposed to be a realistic nightmare. If they tried stop motion, which would usually be the obvious choice, it would work, except in this case, the knight is supposed to be made out of glass, so you would be able to see the rig right through it. And yeah, just putting someone in a costume would look like someone in a costume, not exactly a flat piece of glass. So this is where George Lucas enters the picture. A few years prior to that, he had started Industrial Light and Magic to make the effects on his own movies. And when there was a little bit of time between productions, they would sometimes take on a few outside gigs to help pay the bills, mainly from his friends like Steven Spielberg.
That's great.
It's going to be great.
That's going to be great.
It's going to be great.
That's going to be...
So they were working on the film, but as their main specialty was practical effects, they quickly realized that this one little scene was going to be a problem. It was basically impossible. Until one day, visual effects supervisor Dennis Muren had an idea. What if the computer guys gave it a try? Alright, now I'm about to go full Christopher Nolan on you because we're about to do some non-linear storytelling, but trust me, this is the best way to do it, it will make sense, bear with me. To recap, this is where we're now, and we're about to split the timeline and go back to 1975 in the New York Institute of Technology. Over there, a team of young computer scientists like Avi Ray Smith, Ed Catmull, and David DeFrancisco were doing a lot of research and experimenting with this new exciting thing called computer-generated images. Up until that point, CGI as technology was used mainly by NASA, the military, and the aviation industry to help train pilots in flight simulators with real-time 3D graphics. So over at the New York Institute of Technology, its founder Alexander Schur believed that computer graphics have a lot of potential. So what he did is to find a really smart group of researchers and essentially giving them unlimited money to mess around with the technology, experiment, research, and see how far they can push it, without any real goals or even deadlines. It sounds like the atmosphere was really exciting. In one of the articles I found, Avi Ray Smith says that every day someone was creating something new. None of us slept, It was like exploring a new continent. They did a lot of innovation in there. Initially, they tackled the historically slow, tedious, and expensive process of traditional hand-drawn 2D animation by creating a computer software that would speed up the process significantly by automatically filling in frames between two drawings. Eventually, they added another dimension and shifted their focus towards 3D. They saw it as a technology that would allow for a completely new art form. So they continued to experiment with rendering, texture, shading, and creating some very simple animations. And slowly but surely, everyone had the exact same goal, the big dream, the thing that everyone wanted to do, something that they simply called the movie. Keep that in mind, it's important. The movie. It sounded crazy at the time, but what they wanted to make was a fully computer-generated feature-length film. No hand drawing. Except none of them were filmmakers. They were all researchers, programmers, computer scientists, and very, very smart, but none of them knew anything about making movies. And considering how limited computing power was at the time, they knew that it would take a long time until it was even physically possible for them to make that movie. So by the late 1970s, some people got discouraged, lost interest, others moved on to other things, and right as the whole thing was starting to fall apart, George Lucas showed up like some type of a Nick Fury and assembled the Computer Science Avengers by hiring them to work for him at Lucasfilm.
The problem was there really were no special effects facilities at that time. There really wasn't any industry. So I was sort of forced to start my own company.
The thing is that, in addition to Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas had also started a computer division whose task was to make the filmmaking process easier by bringing computers into it. He wanted digital sound, digital mixing, digital compositing, everything digital. And within the computer division, there was a little team called the Lucasfilm Graphics Group. They carried on the spirit and the legacy of the New York Institute of Technology. And now, it is time to finally properly introduce you to the person I've been speaking to, Greg Good.
I actually started at Lucasfilm in May of 1982 doing janitorial and security work. And that led to an entry-level position with the computer division, which is doing the backups and just general things that needed doing. And then I sort of fell in with these guys who were part of the graphics group. So I was surrounded by pioneers, and they were willing to teach me stuff. So I was just incredibly lucky.
For years, they would continue to mess around, experiment, and slowly but surely make progress. And during all that time, the one big dream was still the movie.
Ed and Alvy and everybody there knew we were planning on making a movie. But right now, research is paying the bills, and we need all this stuff to make movies anyway. We needed compositing, we needed rendering, we needed, all that. But the computer division was a research and development division who we were very specifically told we were not allowed to make movies. Andre and Wally B was officially a technology demonstration because it was against the rules for us to make a movie.
Why were you not allowed to make movies?
The movie business is weird. That's all I could say. ILM was very territorial. They were the movie-making part of them, and then there was the production part of Lucasfilm that was making movies. They were making Return of the Jedi at the time. We did not make movies. That's just the way it was.
And just like that, the timelines are merging again, and we're right where we left off. It's 1985. CGI is still this technology that is sort of adopted, but not really. It is very, very new. The majority of its commercial use is in things like broadcasting packages, like flying logos, spinning globes for the news, and other than that, mostly in advertising. As for film, it had been used a few times here and there, but mostly for things that were meant to look like computer graphics anyways, like the ones in Star Wars, Future World, and Star Trek II, for example. There was of course also Tron, but again, it was meant to be this digital world, so realism was not of the biggest concern. Basically, nobody had tried to make something photorealistic with CGI and incorporate it in a feature-length film. Which finally brings us back to where we started. We have Industrial Light and Magic not being able to pull off this impossible shot with practical effects, and Dennis Muren having an idea.
Can you guys do something? And, Ed and Bill and those guys said, sure. That required a lot of extra compute power. So I took 2 packs of data If you look up the CDC 9766 drive, it's like a small washing machine, had giant packs of data that could hold 300 megabytes. Like, whoa. I took those on an airplane, spent 2 weeks in Southern California using computers at CDC, and I computed the last 134 frames of that shot. This shot had the first, and for a very long time, the only rack focus shot in CG history. It wasn't just that we had the first CG character in a live action film, but there's that shot where his hands come together and the camera tilts up past the sword and then it racks focus back to his face. Yeah, it was a bear to compute, and I think that's part of why nobody did a rack focus shot again for many years after that. If you ever get to see it on 35 millimeter, which you probably never will, because this doesn't work on DVD, but there's a kind of a brown sort of ribbon around the window with little writing in it, and those are our initials.
And just like that, after 6 months of working on this one little short sequence, they managed to pull it off. For the first time ever, a real person and a computer-generated character seamlessly interacted with each other in a feature-length film. It was a significant moment not only as a technical achievement, but because of what it proved as an idea. Computers could now bring things to movies that were otherwise impossible. Only 4 years later, James Cameron felt confident enough to use CGI to create the water creature in the abyss. Steven Spielberg, the producer of Young Sherlock Holmes, was now comfortable enough with the technology to bring realistic dinosaurs to life in Jurassic Park. The writer, Chris Columbus, would go on to direct Home Alone and later the first 2 Harry Potter films, which, as you know, are filled with some beloved CGI characters. Dennis Muren, the person who saw the potential in the computer guys, continued to pioneer digital effects and won multiple Oscars for pushing the technology forward. And as for the Lucasfilm Graphics group, the people who actually made the shot, the outsiders, the ones that had to work in the hallway, they continued to dream about making the movie. So to help with all their experiments, they had also developed a hardware, a very powerful computer that could do all of that much faster than all the others, and what they called it was the Pixar Image Computer. Eventually, they became their own little company with the majority of the investment money coming from Steve Jobs. For years, selling that computer was their main business, but as the rest of the industry was catching up, they knew that they had to do something different. And now, after almost 2 decades of chasing that goal, it was finally time to make the movie, which they called Toy Story.
When we started making Toy Story, there didn't exist computers that could render it. So we were betting on the fact that, in 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to put together enough render farm to actually render this movie. But it works because the story works. That's the important thing. We knew that the new look and the amazing technology would keep people's attention for about 10 minutes. And if the story wasn't good, then nothing else mattered.
Oh, and the person that was going to direct it was the one that all the way back in 1985 had hand-animated a knight made out of stained glass magically coming to life. Someone that you might know as John Lasseter.
We made so many really stupid, boneheaded mistakes making that film, and learned so much that it led to me saying the stupidest thing I've ever said out loud where people could hear me, which was, the next movie's going to be so easy. Turns out they're all hard. Movie making is just hard. It just is. But you have to enjoy that process. We're trying new things. So we worked crazy stupid hours on Toy Story, but we knew we were doing something new and exciting. We couldn't wait to spring it on the world. And all I wanted was for the movie to not tank. So when it turned out to be kind of a hit, that was nice.
That needs to be another video on its own, the whole story about Pixar and Toy Story. Don't be surprised if I send you another email at some point.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, you got my email now.
Is there some other things that you tell your students about storytelling that you've learned over the years that you feel are important?
Sure. Well, big one is make the movie you want to see. Another is the only rule you cannot break is thou shalt not be boring, right? That's the technical name for a film that does not convey emotions. And that is cinema's entire job, is to convey emotions. That's it. That's all cinema can possibly do.